much for that marvelous welcome and thorough review of my career. I've forgotten about some of those things. I'm so pleased to be here to the family of this wonderful, wonderful historic church. Thank you for inviting me. To Rosa Bird and all the birds, and there appear to be lots of you here. Thank you for making this happen and being so patient with me as we put this program together. I am thrilled to be here. I must also tell you a couple of personal things before I continue. One is the list. My father was a member of the Baha'i faith, and I will tell you that he worked very, very hard on behalf of the Baha'i faith, not only in Wisconsin, but also here in the Washington area. And I was very proud of him for that, and I respect the faith very, very much. I'm very happy to see Mayor Silverberg here, and also former Mayor Yulee, and all of these handsome men. I know that this year is a very important year for all of us. First of all, of course, it is the 50th year since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And I truly believe that this 50th year will be as important in American life as 1968 was. Now, 1968 was called by many the year that shattered America. I know some of you were alive at that time. I know some of you were active in the shattering of many, many of American so-called values at that time. We were involved in the shattering of the Vietnam War. We were involved in the shattering of the walls that kept human rights and civil rights from coming to all in this country. We shattered the ceilings that kept women in their place. We were student activists. Were any of you involved in teach-ins? Remember those? And we were part of the liberation theology movement. Remember that? We also were part of the war on poverty. We were involved legally, socially, formally, informally, sometimes illegally, in challenging the status quo that existed in this country and the world in 1968. Because we Americans in 1968, as we Americans in 2018, had to decide who and what we were going to be. We had to decide who we were in 1968. Were we serving in Vietnam or Laos? Did we know someone who was serving? Did we know someone who served and didn't come back? Perhaps we got on a bus and rode to Selma or Tuscaloosa, as I did, to help register black folks to vote. Perhaps we were on a college campus or university organizing a black student union. Perhaps we were starting a job and being told by an employer, "You're lucky to be here." Perhaps we were picketing and demonstrating against racist policies in housing, public education, civil service, and the military. I tried to be involved in many, many of those activities in 1968. What I ended up doing was working in the war on poverty for an organization in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, called the Social Development Commission. It was funded by President Johnson's war on poverty. And my job was to help teach Salvadoran and Mexican immigrants to Milwaukee English. I taught English as a second language. I also worked in an organization the name of which some of you might remember, called OIC, Opportunities Industrial Center. And I also taught English there, but not to immigrants to the United States, but to African Americans from the Deep South who had moved north and who were barely literate. Some of them could not write their names. I also ran a summer newspaper for inner city, as we called it, kids in Milwaukee. Kids who were supposed to be kept out of trouble. Kids who were considered to be perhaps a little dangerous. And I was the editor of the newspaper, and I hired 10 teenagers from the streets of Milwaukee to come to work for me, and we did stories having to do with the lives of teenagers in the inner city. I also went to Selma and Tuscaloosa with some of my friends from college, the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, because we felt compelled to go there to help register African Americans to vote. When I went there, on the bus from Milwaukee to Selma, I entered a world I'd never seen before, and I was petrified. People with guns, people with signs with all kinds of hateful things listed on those signs. When we drove around the communities, we were told by the driver of our cars to lie on the floor of the car, so that if we were shot at, the shooter would only shoot the driver. I came back to Milwaukee thoroughly shaken and thoroughly determined that I was going to do my part in changing a society in which young people my age had to worry about being shot to death because they wanted to help other Americans vote. At the end of 1968, you might also remember, after the riots in the cities, after all these protests, President Johnson created something called the Kerner Commission. The Kerner Commission, for those of you who are too young to remember, was a group of men, composed of a group of men that the president appointed to this commission. Kerner, Otto Kerner, was the former governor of Chicago, and he ran the commission. And the commission's job was just a small one, to figure out what was wrong with America and to put it on paper. And it did that. The Kerner Commission, and I hope that all of you during this month will go online and read the Kerner Commission report. I know you haven't read it in a long time. The Kerner Commission report stands today to be as valid as it was in 1968, to be as succinct today in 2018 as it was in 1968, to be as accurate today in 2018 as it was in 1968, and to be the same call to activism, the same call to duty as it was in 1968. Because of the Kerner Commission report, and a particular part of the Kerner Commission report, I went into television. And the part of the report to which I'm referring stated that one of the contributors to inequity in the United States was the fact that people of color did not have a voice in the mass media in this country. Therefore, we, white, black, and others, did not know what the lives of people of color were like in this country. And the Kerner Commission report said, in no uncertain terms, until that changes, we will not have other change in this country. I watched television in the 60s, of course, as all of you did. I watched the coverage of the Vietnam War. I watched the coverage of the civil rights movement. I watched the coverage of the women's rights movement. And I said, you know, television has a lot of power. And I wanted to be a part of that power. And I wanted to be able to use that power to promote equity and civil rights. And I wanted to use that power also because I was brought up by immigrant parents. And I heard stories every single day about why my parents came to this country and what they left behind. And I'd like to share a couple of those stories with you. My father and mother were born in Guyana. Guyana, in the days when they were born and when they were raised, Guyana was a British colony. It was part of the British Empire. My father was raised on a sugarcane plantation. He and his friends ate so much raw sugarcane that before they were teenagers, all their teeth fell out. I never saw my father with his own teeth. As a child and as an adult, I only saw my father with his false teeth. My grandmother, on my mother's side, suffered from an ailment that doesn't exist in the United States today. It's called the goiter. Do any of you know what a goiter is? Okay. Goiter is caused by a lack of iodine. My mother and her mother had goiters, which was a protrusion of the gland in the throat, because they did not get enough iodine in their diet. My father's sister suffered from another disease in Guyana that I'm sure has never existed in this country, a tropical disease as it is. Elephantianism. Elephantianism. I can't even say it. Do you know what that is? Elephantiasis. It's a tropical disease caused by the mosquito worm, which bites and can bite people, bites their legs in countries where there are many, many, many mosquitoes, Guyana among them, infects the legs and causes the legs to swell up and be extremely painful. Well, Guyana, in those days, and to some extent today, is one of those countries that our president referred to the last few days. And I, like many, many people whose families came to this country, deliberately came to this country to get away from the past and to build the future, have been shocked, dismayed, disappointed, and angered by that language. Nobody comes to this country because they want to leave paradise in their own countries. Who, if you were told tomorrow, pack up and leave, you wouldn't leave Alexandria because everything is great here. But you would leave if you didn't have water to drink, you didn't have proper housing, your children couldn't go to school, there was violence in the streets, people were shooting at each other, buildings were being bombed, and you didn't have any hope for your children. People don't come to this country because life in their countries is great and fabulous. They come here because the United States of America has always been the land of opportunity. In Guyana, when my father was a young man, at the age of 13, and this is throughout the British Empire, even in Great Britain at that time, when a young person became 13, they took an examination at school. That examination determined whether that young person would go on to higher education, namely what we would consider high school, or would end their formal education and go on to apprentice with someone, perhaps to learn to be a preacher, a teacher, or a civil servant. Those were the three jobs that were available. My father got malaria, and on the day that the exam was given, he was sick and could not take the exam. Now, unlike the school systems of this country, the British did not give second chances with these exams. And those of you who may have relatives from the British West Indies or from former British colonies understand this. You had 1 day in your life to take that examination, which would determine the future of your life. If you didn't come because you were sick, if you didn't come because your parent was sick and you had to take care of them, whatever the reason, there was no make-up exam. Your life was determined. My father couldn't accept this because he was a smart young man and he knew he had more to give. So, in Guyana, in the 1930s and into the 40s, my father took and became an expert in long-distance learning. Now, how do you do long-distance learning without any electronics, without a telephone, without the internet, without a radio? You do it with paper. You do it by mail. And he started taking courses by mail from the United States in electronics. Now imagine this. You are a young person. You order this course. You have, first of all, you have to find out about the course. So somebody has to tell you about it. Usually you find out through an adult. My father found out about these electronics courses, and he wrote to New York or wherever to get the course, which came in a little booklet. You took the little, read the booklet, you took the exam, and you sent it back to New York. Then you waited for the people in New York to correct your exam, to send it back to you, and tell you whether you passed or not. Then you waited for them to send you the next step. How long do you think that took? Months. Months. But that was okay for my father because he was a patient man and he was determined. Now, let me tell you what else my father did. He decided that he wanted an education and that he wanted his children, 3 girls, poor guy, to have an education too. How and where was he going to get an education for himself and for his 3 daughters? Not in Guyana. He moved to Aruba because Aruba gave people opportunity, because Aruba had jobs. Jobs in oil. Standard Oil, now known as Exxon, built in Aruba in the 1930s, what was then the world's largest oil refinery. And Standard Oil needed intelligent people to come to work there. People from all over the world went to Aruba, to Jamaica, to other islands, Trinidad, to work. So when I was born, my classmates in school were all young people from all over the world. China, India, Africa, the United States. My father was the world's first and best networker because he decided he wanted to come to the US. So, did he make friends with the Chinese working in the refinery? No. Did he make friends with the Canadians working in the refinery? No. Did he make friends with the Brazilians working in the refinery? No. He made friends with the Americans working in the refinery. And through that, he got a job offer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Why Milwaukee, I will never But what I do know was that he saw opportunity. He didn't care about the weather. He didn't care about the cheese. He didn't care that he was going to Dairyland. All he knew was he got a job and he got opportunity. Now, you can imagine that my parents were very strict people because they were Caribbean people. And my father, and I'm sure there are many of you here who grew up with parents, who didn't have to speak to you in order to get your attention.
Thank you.
For those of you who are under the age of 20, just look at my face for a minute. Before you melt, let me tell you about some of the people we met in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 1950s, who became my hero. The woman named Vel Phillips. Those of you who are involved in democratic politics should know or have known about Vel Phillips, because she was the first African-American woman to serve on the Democratic National Committee. Vel Phillips was an African-American woman, a Howard University graduate, the first black woman to graduate from the University of Wisconsin Law School in 1951. In 1956, she became the first woman and African-American elected to the Milwaukee Board of Aldermen, the city council in Milwaukee. She was the first black woman judge in Wisconsin, and she was the first African-American woman and African-American elected to a state office in Wisconsin. In 1977, she became Secretary of State in the state of Wisconsin. My father, somehow or another, managed to find her and her husband in 1955, and they became my family's attorneys. They helped my father avoid bankruptcy in 1961, when, after my mother's death from cancer, he could not pay the outstanding hospital bills. To this day, I find it incredible that in this country, people are still having to declare bankruptcy because they cannot pay hospital bills. My mother died in 1961. In order to avoid bankruptcy, my father did not pay our heating bills, the bills for oil to heat our house, for 2 years in Wisconsin. That's 2 winters in Wisconsin. But that was the only, we slept, my sisters and I slept on the floor in our living room. Fortunately, we had sleeping bags because we were in the Scouts and we used to camp out. But we knew what was happening. It wasn't fun camping out on a cold floor in an unheated house in January or February. Actually, winter began in August. So, one of the things that I get crazed about is the healthcare system in this country. We are here to talk about Dr. King and his legacy. Let me tell you a little bit about his international legacy, because as an immigrant to this country, I appreciate everything that Dr. King did, because Dr. King was not just your leader and an inspiration to Americans, he was an inspiration to people all over this world. In 1975, I was on the board of an organization called OEF International. OEF was kind of a private Peace Corps. I and several other people traveled to Honduras on a trip to do a report about one of OEF's projects. OEF was helping poor Honduran women learn how to raise pigs. For 2 reasons. One was they could slaughter the pigs and use them as food for their families. And 2, they could raise the pigs and sell them and create income for their families. We went to a town called La Ceiba in Honduras, actually quite outside La Ceiba. We were filming and interviewing these women. Suddenly the rain started coming down, so we had to seek shelter. My cameraman and I went with one of the women, let's call her Doña Maria, and she said, let's go to my house and we'll wait for the rain to end. We went to her house. What was her house? Her house was a thatched roof hut with 3 sides, perhaps the size of the area that the choir is seated in. There were 3 sides, and one side was open. She had some rope and a pulley, and when the weather was nice, she pulled down a thatched roof scarf, and when the weather was not nice, when the weather was nice, she pulled it up so to get the sun. The rain was falling, so we were sitting there. She had a baby in arms and 3 or 4 other children playing in this area. And I looked around at the walls in her house. On one wall was a picture of Jesus. On the other wall was a picture of President Kennedy. And on the 3rd wall was a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. So I figured, well, I know why she has Jesus on the wall, because she's a religious woman. So I asked her, why do you have President Kennedy's picture on the wall? And she said, because he sent the Peace Corps. And they've helped us. They brought water to our village and sanitation. And they built a playground for the children. So why do you have Dr. King's picture on the wall? And she said, because we all heard about his Campaña de Pobres, his poor people's campaign. And we were waiting for him to come to help us, because we are poor people. And then she said, but we heard he was assassinated by a man filled with hate. So he's not coming, is he? Well, Dr. King was a friend to that woman in that hut in Honduras. He was an inspiration. And in her life, he was as significant as Jesus and President Kennedy. In 2018, as our mayor mentioned a few minutes ago, some Americans apparently want this country to give up its leadership in the world. We don't want women like Doña Maria in Honduras to look up to us. We want to give up our political, our social, and our moral leadership in this world. However, you and I don't have to give those leadership qualities up. And I suspect we are not going to give them up. In 2018, some Americans have apparently decided that our society is based upon the zero-sum game, in which one person or one group can win something, equality, healthcare, education, jobs, only by causing another person or group to lose something. We don't have to accept that either. And we are not able to. Some Americans in 2018 think that if you don't talk about a problem or even deny its existence, it will go away. Some even wish that those who do talk about our problems are fake news. We will not be quiet. We will talk, we will protest, we will analyze. Some Americans today, in 2018, think that the problem in America is people who are different. May I suggest to those Americans that they Google the history of Irish people in the United States, the history of German people in the United States, the history of Puerto Ricans, Haitians, Guyanese, Mexicans, Kenyans, Nigerians, Somalians in the United States. And they will see themselves in those histories of our time, by the Dr. Kings of our time, and by our brothers and sisters who preached, who picketed, and who went to the polls. We and they helped move this country forward. We helped our fellow Americans realize that, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. In this year, 2018, 50 years after the death of Dr. King, we must continue to demand, in our speech, in our prayers, and in our action, that our country fulfill Dr. King's legacy. We have all the tools we need to make this happen in the year 2018. We can shatter apathy, injustice, ignorance, racism, violence, and war. Among the tools that Dr. King gave us, our intelligence plus our character, our unarmed truth and unconditional love, our focus on the light, not the darkness, our understanding that science and religion are not rivals, they are complementary, and that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I ask you to remember Dr. King in your hearts, in your prayers, in your speech, and in your actions. God bless him. God bless us. And let us all be good Americans.
Justice be demanded, right and brilliant righteousness.